found myself working for nonprofits kind of all over the world, based in Asia for a while and in Eastern Europe. And I really loved the work. But in spite of having this really cool life that looked amazing on the surface, I was really lonely. I was traveling at one point, on planes every few days, and I had lots of friends back home, but they were all kind of moving on with their lives. And I would be in really cool spots, but on my own or with different people all the time. And so eventually, after some interesting stories, I ended up moving back to Canada and kind of fell into the world of training and development in the corporate world. So I started a corporate training and team building business. And then a few years into running that, I found myself in a very similar situation. I built this great business, had a nice team. We were running great programs, had fabulous clients. Everything on the surface looked wonderful and amazing and great downtown office location and all that. But I didn't have community. And so that's when I started the Dovetail Community, which is how we came to talk today. I have this beautiful community of women entrepreneurs from across North America with a couple of women from around the world in the mix. And it really fills my cup. I still have the other business, but having this community has changed my life for the better.
Okay, Alexis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so to get started, if people take away just one thing from our conversation today, what do you hope that is?
Oh gosh, just the importance of community. I think that people, a lot of people that I've talked to about community over the last few years think that it's something that just should naturally happen. That, like if you don't have it and it hasn't naturally happened for you, then maybe there's something wrong, or, it's just sort of supposed to fall in your lap. But it's something that we can create intentionally and that we can participate in really intentionally. And if you don't have it right now, it's totally okay. And it's easy to find and it's easy to build. And it's something that's available to you no matter who you are or what you need.
Amazing. I can't wait to get into that later in the conversation. But let's maybe start by, I want to learn a bit more about your background and trajectory up until this point. So what's got you here?
A long and winding road. So I started my career as an educator. So I used to be a teacher. And I knew I didn't want to be a teacher forever, but it was an easy place to land out of university. And I taught for a little while, and then I got to working overseas with international schools, British schools, and Canadian schools overseas, and then found my way into adult training and development. And after a few years,
What did you teach, Alexis?
oh, I was primary junior teacher. So people tell me I have teacher energy, and it's true. I taught year 3 and 4 when I was in the UK, and then depending on the school, like grades 3, 4, 5, 6 in the American curriculum. So yeah, it was all the juniors. And then after that, I got into teacher training and adult training development, went back to university, found that I really loved working with the teachers, and I loved the kind of some of the dynamic challenges of constantly evolving curriculum and not just teaching the same thing year after year, which can happen if you're a primary junior teacher. And then, yeah, I found myself working for nonprofits kind of all over the world, based in Asia for a while and in Eastern Europe. And I really loved the work. But in spite of having this really cool life that looked amazing on the surface, I was really lonely. I was traveling at one point, on planes every few days, and I had lots of friends back home, but they were all kind of moving on with their lives. And I would be in really cool spots, but on my own or with different people all the time. And so eventually, after some interesting stories, I ended up moving back to Canada and kind of fell into the world of training and development in the corporate world. So I started a corporate training and team building business. And then a few years into running that, I found myself in a very similar situation. I built this great business, had a nice team. We were running great programs, had fabulous clients. Everything on the surface looked wonderful and amazing and great downtown office location and all that. But I didn't have community. And so that's when I started the Dovetail Community, which is how we came to talk today. I have this beautiful community of women entrepreneurs from across North America with a couple of women from around the world in the mix. And it really fills my cup. I still have the other business, but having this community has changed my life for the better.
That is definitely a long and winding trajectory, and it's continuing, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
So something that I find interesting about your your past is I think you had a year of yes at one point where you said yes to most things that like most opportunities and stuff. Can you maybe tell us about what this year was like for you, what you took away from it? And then also as a follow-up to that, you've got this great talk online, and one of the things I took away from that talk is there's a big problem with always sort of looking for these peak experiences or these big moments that are gonna change your life. So that's a two-part question. If you want to tackle it one at a time, I don't know.
One at a time. I will say I've been a yes person for a long time, but I've done it intentionally a couple of times in my adult life where I've just decided that I needed and wanted to say yes to all the opportunities that were coming my way. I think it's really easy to get into our own little lane and decide like, no, this is the kind of person I am, and this is what I do and don't do, and what, I have room for in my life. And I think that by having these intentional periods of saying yes to the opportunities, not, getting wildly distracted, but just saying yes to things that came along, opportunities to go abroad and speak, or even to just become a speaker, or to do any of these things, saying yes has been really, really transformative. On the other hand, it also can lead down a path of, feeling a little bit distracted and leading, if you have a team, leading your team off course and not staying kind of aligned with where you said you wanted to go initially. So I wouldn't recommend it as a lifelong practice, but I would say like from the stints that I've done of just being really open to possibility and to whatever presents itself, it's led to a really interesting life and lots of good travels and friends around the world and really interesting experiences from, jumping out of planes to all manner of things. So yeah, that part it's been really interesting. And then on the other question that you asked within that was in reference to a talk that I gave that got picked up by an organization that kind of spread around the world, which has been really interesting because again, I've made contact with people who've seen it and on all sorts of different places in the world. And in that talk, I really specifically mentioned that, like, while we can all have these beautiful Instagram perfect lives, with all these peak experiences, it's not necessarily those peak experiences that change us in the long run. It's what happens behind the scenes from them, and it's the decisions that we make. So it's not just about, jumping off the bridge or swimming with the alligators or, working in beautiful communities or whatever it might be. It's what we decide to do with that at the end. So hope that answers the question.
Yeah, yeah, there's so much gold in there. I think something that'll stick with me from that is like that there are times in your life where this saying yes to everything is appropriate, but it's bracketed. You're not going to do it indefinitely, but it's sort of like it seems like if you're always saying no to things, it's almost like you're operating from a place of defense and a place of fear. And if you say yes to more things, like you're putting yourself more into the flow of life and you're more open and more opportunities are just going to land in your lap if you take that approach, which I really like.
That's a beautiful summary of it. Yes, I totally agree. Just letting life flow.
Um, so you have reinvented yourself at least probably two or three times now. Any thoughts on what, like, let's say someone is listening to this and they've got an idea for something, they want to make a change or they want to start a business or whatever. Anything that's worked well for you in the past, whenever you're in those moments where you're trying to make a decision about whether to do something or not, like what's helped you actually take the leap?
I think for me, as Steve Jobs said, it's easier to connect the dots looking back. That at the time I didn't realize it, but I think that it's been less about reinventing myself and it's been more about uncovering who I really am beneath all of the masks that in society we're taught to wear. Mostly women, but also men are taught this as well. And that peeling back those layers and letting myself kind of come out to light has been really what has changed my life and what has enabled me to continually evolve and have all of these different chapters in the story of my life. And so for those that are thinking about that or thinking like I'm ready for the next chapter or I'm ready for the next season, And it doesn't have to mean throwing away who you are or like forming some completely new identity. I know some people have really thrived with that. So I'm not here to prescribe anything specifically, but I would say it's just like finding those opportunities to really dig into like what's beneath it all, what's beneath all of the shoulds and musts and judgments and expectations. And, those things can come from our families and they can come from society and they can come from our school groups and the communities that we've historically been part of. But it's just how can we peel all of that back and really learn about who we are under that and take the best of what we are and not just throw it away because we think we need to have some identity that someone on Instagram or somewhere else told us that we must have.
I really like that. It's sort of counterintuitive. What have you found most helpful for peeling back those layers? Like what's worked for you in that regard?
Gosh, it's going to sound a little cliche, but I did this meditation retreat years ago, and I'd never meditated a day in my life. I went on this thing, and I don't know what I was getting into, but I was in this really interesting inflection point in my career. I was living in Asia, and I just had some tumultuous things happen in the work and just in my life as well, with family members getting sick and stuff. And friend of mine said, you should go do this meditation retreat in the jungle in Thailand. It's 11 days and it's silent and you fast for much of it. And it wasn't Vipassana, but that's the closest thing that, if people have heard of Vipassana meditation, it's the most similar to what I did. And that experience just shut down the noise. I think any opportunity we can give ourselves to quiet the noise of the outside world, to really tune in to like, and I think there's something in that because I've talked to a lot of people that have done Vipassana, and for myself as well. At first, I was still trying to do like what they prescribed as like the right thing, to be the good girl, to be the good student who could kind of do what they said. And, it was like, don't write anything and don't bring any books. And you've got to sit in the silent meditation and you sit for like 12 hours a day and you fast for this amount of time and da, 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 da. And like at first, the first couple of days, I was really struggling with that because I process things through writing. I'm a writer and I really wanted that. And so I took out my notebook and honestly, I meditated through the days. But then when we went back to our little, and it cells, like we actually had a cell and as the monks sleep in a cell on a cement pad. But I went back and I cheated, I brought my notebook out. But that really helped me to process what I was feeling throughout the day and what I was experiencing. And, I think in those situations, especially your first retreat like that, you can't help but relive so much of your life story and so many of these experiences that bubble up to the surface when the world is quiet. And so processing that and not just doing the thing that was prescribed, even though I was technically kind of breaking the rules. And that was like the first time that I really started to acknowledge that I had started to peel back those layers and to become more of myself, and also harness the ability to do so, to recognize it was something I could do intentionally, not that I'd just kind of been doing it and without realizing what I was doing, but that this was an opportunity for me to learn how to silence the world, tune into myself, listen to my own intuition, and just free write and let what I perceive as God to kind of speak onto that paper and help guide me into the next chapter of my life.
It reminds me of a quote from Eckhart Tolle. It's like silence is the language that God speaks. Everything else is a poor translation. And what you're saying about writing is really interesting too, because it's like whenever you're doing, say, like a silent retreat or whatever, like you're really going deep into the unconscious there. And writing is essentially a technology for making that conscious and getting it out and seeing it objectively. And then only when you can see it in front of you, like, can you actually properly process it. So I think it's so important if you are doing a silent retreat, being able to have some kind of way to do it, like you're recommending there, which I don't think many people do. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, because we're told not to, because it is part of the process that they don't want you. Because I think for some people it might become a diversion or that sort of thing. But for me, it was part of processing that particular experience. And I've done silent meditation retreats since that first, extremely impactful one where I went from zero to full meditation retreat. And I brought my notebook. And I've also done another one where I didn't bring a notebook, but I do find that ability to process and uncover what's hiding beneath it all is really, really important.
And are you doing this in secret? Like, are you hiding your notebook and stuff, or are you like,
The first retreat I did, they were like very adamant about no writing and no books. And it was like, it's a quite a strict Buddhist monastery. And, we were sleeping on like cement pad with the wood block that the monks use. And it was like quite rigorous. And so for at least the first half, I didn't let them see that I had a notebook. So I was kind of doing it secretly. And then for me, it was just therapeutic. Like I would go back to the little cell at night and just let it pour out. And then towards the end, I did have the notebook out a little bit. And at one point at the very end, they said that if you want to write down your thoughts to share when we break silence, then you can. And so then I was just like fully outed that I was sitting at the like when we broke the fast in the morning for like the morning soup or whatever, I would have my little notebook out and yeah, right then.
You're a rule breaker.
It's that Katharine Hepburn quote, if you follow all the rules, you miss all the fun. I think that one really applies to my life.
I haven't heard that one. I think people that are entrepreneurial or they just tend to question things more and they ask like, why am I doing this? And then I think when you do that, you're less likely to blindly follow authority and actually just, what works here, what doesn't, and let's do what works.
What do I
Um,
need? Like more than anything else, like what, outside of this experience, I'll never see these people again. What do I need? What does my soul need? Why am I here? And it's not just to follow the rules. So yeah, I agree with you. Entrepreneurs are very much like this.
for sure. And do you have like, I know that you regularly meditate. Do you meditate and write together like on an ongoing basis now? Like, how does that work for you currently?
Yeah, I will be totally honest. I've had a really hectic few months and I've been meditating, but not in my regular practice. But I do typically have a notebook nearby if I meditate. It's not in the midst of meditation because I find then I can kind of make an excuse for myself of, oh, these things are popping into my mind and I've got to write out my to-do list or whatever. It's not that sort of thing. But like, sometimes, especially if I'm in this place where we just moved to, where it's a beautiful place and we have a lot of nature, I'm on a lake and that sort of thing. Like sometimes I feel like I'll something will flow through me or I'll need to kind of get something on paper after I've meditated. And it's not the task lists or the, put this on the calendar or whatever. It's more of like what do I need to hear? What does my soul need to hear today? What needs to be remembered about who I am or the work I'm doing in the world or the people that I serve, that kind of thing.
Fantastic. All right. So I think now we should maybe start speaking about community. And before we get in there, what does the word community actually mean to you?
That's such a good question. And I know there's like, you can look it up in the dictionary, like what does community mean? But to me, it's it's a step beyond not being lonely. It's more than that. It's this feeling of safety and connection and being seen and heard and valued and loved and welcomed. And I think that's essential for all of us. So.
I love that. I love that. Okay. And how important do you think this is in human life? Like, has this always been a priority for you, Alexis, or has there been times when this wasn't maybe top of your value hierarchy?
Oh yeah, I've been like bonkers for community since I was a little kid. Like growing up, we traveled a lot, and like wherever we were when I was little, I would find like gaggles of local kids, and I started funny little small businesses on beaches, like making bracelets, but it would have like a whole group of girls and boys too. And then when I was quite little, my dad had gone to summer camp, which is a big thing in Canada. I know you have a bit of it in the UK as well. But my dad had gone to summer camp. So I decided that I was going to go to summer camp. But I was really young for it. Like my parents were like, oh, we can wait until you're like 8 or 9 or 10. I think I was like 6 or something at the time. And I was like, no, I really, really want to go. And so I did this like massive research project and made all these like chart boards and things for them and put up comparisons of all the camps and decided that, I chose the one that I really, really wanted and got all these like videos sent to the house, like VHS at the time, and started going to summer camp at a really young age. And, again, in hindsight, I realized that was just a real thirst for connection and belonging and community. And summer camp is really the promise of like being, if you're at a good camp that's well run and that kids, find their place in, it is like this beautiful little community that forms over the period of a few weeks in the summer. And the values and the norms and the traditions and all of it are just so, so incredible. And I was a summer camper for my whole childhood. And then I worked at camp, and then I was a camp director and started a camp with the group of schools that I worked for. So I was a camp kid forever. And that was mostly because of the community. And then when I worked overseas, like a lot of the work I was doing was building community and organizations, which again, in hindsight, and I don't think I realized that was what I was doing, but a lot of the workshopping and a lot of the extracurricular stuff and the things that I really wanted to emphasize and go above and beyond to implement in the organizations that I worked with and in the schools and the groups that I worked with was to build community for people, to help them find that place of belonging and relevance and long-term connection.
Fantastic. And you went through a pretty dark period. I've heard you speak about before, where there was a period where you were suicidal. And can you maybe tell me about, what this experience was like for you at the time and anything that you took away from like those dark moments? Because they say, like your darkest moments, like these are like often the most pivotal in your trajectory. Has that been the case for you?
Completely. So I started Dovetail, which is the community of women entrepreneurs that I now run. I started it a few years into running my other company, which I thought that I was like living my purpose and doing what I was meant to be doing with my life. When I started the team building company, I sort of fell into it. And as we grew and started running programs in different parts of the country and started doing work that felt like, well, this is, what I'm supposed to be doing. I again felt like I was very much like wearing a little bit of a mask and like having the outward success that is rewarded in our society, but not the inner success of feeling connected to my peers or having people that really deeply understood me. And, I'm very lucky. I've had good friends from childhood that I've kept into adulthood, and I love them. They're like some of my closest girlfriends. But I didn't have anyone who really understood the entrepreneurial ambition and the drive and the fire that so many of us carry. And it's just incessant. If you're an entrepreneur, like you can't shut it down, especially like the visionary types. The ideation, like I think I own, I don't know how many different websites at this point, but like 50 domain names or something. And it's just part of you. It's just in there. And I would spend time with my old friends and I love them. And it was by no means their fault, but I would just feel like nobody really gets me, or am I just a workaholic, or what am I missing here? How come I just don't feel as connected? And I was really missing a sense of community and belonging with people that shared the same values and just some of the same characteristics, that inner drive, that inner fire. And I didn't know it at the time because I hadn't filled that gap, but I went kind of looking for, where are my people or what might help me feel like less alone in some of the things I was dealing with. And I went to events and conferences, and some of those things really made it worse because I just felt like, oh my gosh, these people are not my people. Or they were like, tech conferences because we had a lot of tech clients and they're heavily male dominated. And there were things that happened in some of those environments that weren't very safe or positive for women, myself included. And I just had a couple really bad experiences. And I was working downtown Toronto at the time and just started to feel, really isolated. Like, I don't know why I'm doing all of this. And even though I should be really happy, I'm not really happy. And all the shoulds and musts. And, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but I still feel horrible. And the sense of dread just steadily increased. And I was taking the subway home every day from the office. And I got to a point where I couldn't walk down the subway steps because I was worried that I would just continue walking. And that's not an easy thing to talk about, but in sharing that, I know that I'm not alone. And that so many entrepreneurs, like whether it's caused by burnout or just that isolation and loneliness, which is often the company's burnout, I think so many of us have experienced, whether it's a moment or, even the thought crossing our mind, or whether it's an entire period where people are having suicidal ideation. Like it is really common for entrepreneurs. And that was really when I had this turning point of like, I need to get more serious help. Like I got into more consistent therapy on a weekly basis. And sought out peer groups. And then eventually I decided I was just going to I thought I would host like a little weekend with maybe a dozen women. If I could just find a dozen women who are kind of like me, we'd do this weekend. And instead of just a dozen, I ended up with 50 who wanted to come. So we rented a lodge, and that was the beginning of Dovetail. We did a 50-woman weekend, and it was a really, really beautiful experience. And it was just full of like peer sharing and roundtables and people just being really honest. And like it wasn't a conference and nobody had to perform. We did it in a lodge, so people had slippers on and had their hair down and makeup off, and just like real authenticity and vulnerability and just raw honesty that I think a lot of us need to know that we're not alone.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Alexis. Yeah, that's a really interesting story. With entrepreneurs, like I'm trying to think because we tend to be quite not always, but we tend to be quite isolated in what we do. And do you think this is because we're like there's probably loads of factors at play here, but like we're definitely quite self-reliant. And then I wonder, does that play into it? And then there's also you're just not like if you're running your own business, especially in the first few years, like you're just not in as much or as many social interactions as you might be in other time. So like have you thought much about like why entrepreneurs struggle with isolation and any advice for entrepreneurs listening to this that they find themselves in that spot, they've maybe feel a bit isolated and they want to start finding or building community. Any thoughts for that kind of person?
Yeah, definitely. There are so many answers, like so many ways we could take this, but I think a lot of the time, like it's just natural that an entrepreneur, especially if you're scaling a business, the isolation it's easy to come by. Like we're not set up to really avoid that unless when we start, we know that there are community supports or resources, or we have a trusted, highly trusted peer group. Especially depending on the type of business that you're growing. Like if you've got a team, you can't turn to your team and say, I'm afraid I'm not going to make payroll next month, or I'm in over my head, or I don't know what the heck I'm doing and I really need help. And people just, it doesn't matter like whether people have a $5 million or a $50 million business, like this sense that if I pull back the curtain and show people, they're going to think I'm an idiot, or I'm the only one who's missing out on whatever I'm supposed to know, or I'm just clueless, or whatever it might be. Like these things that I see and I hear from entrepreneurs are so common. And so we kind of hide a little bit because you don't want to be the one who's sort of out to lunch or not informed the way you should be. And it's really hard to find those trusted people. And you can't talk to your employees. And if you have investors, you can't have it be public knowledge that you're struggling because, certainly investors don't want to hear that you're having a crisis of emotions or finances or whatever kind of crisis it might be. And so that just increases the isolation until people find themselves in really dire straits. And I think the suicide rate's even higher among tech entrepreneurs or among entrepreneurs who receive investment because the pressures are so much higher and the isolation is actually increased tenfold. So yeah, I think my advice for anyone, whether you're new to business or whether you've been in business for a long time, is like, you've got to find that peer group. And it doesn't have to, it can be an official peer group. It doesn't have to be an official, facilitated, pay to participate peer group. It can be just finding a couple of other entrepreneurs and saying, hey, like, I'm looking for people that I can be really honest with. Is this something you're interested in as well? Is this something, would you want to have coffee or get together once a month, or maybe just do a weekly check-in or have a WhatsApp group? Like, if this is of interest to you, can we talk about like what that might look like for us? And it sounds really simple, but like that can be the beginning of something. Like that's literally how I started Dovetail. I went to events and I did the weird thing where I like talked to a couple of people, that had spoken, like a couple of women that I thought were cool. And then I got introduced to a couple of other women, and then I asked those women for a couple of introductions. And I would have these like really awkward cold calls with people where I was like, well, I'm a business owner and we haven't met yet, but I'm looking to start a peer group. And I was thinking I'd have a few ladies up to the cottage up north and, would have a good weekend and have some chats by the fire. And like, I had people just like, no, I don't know who you are. Like, go away. I had people laugh at me and be like, okay, well, good luck. Like, this is not a thing. And then I had other people, I had 50 people who said yes. So I think the trick is just like, first of all, kind of settle in and like, is that the thing that you need right now? If you're super isolated, but you know that finding community or connection is going to be what serves you, then yeah, definitely do that. If you're super isolated and you're struggling with suicidal ideation, start with therapy, because going to a peer group, if you're already at that point, it's almost a bit too much for a peer group to take on. Like if you need real help, like start with therapy, start with medical support on that end, and then peer group. So I have like 5 steps to building community that I share and talk sometimes, but that really starts with like knowing what you need, tuning into yourself, listening to yourself, recognizing that there is a gap here, recognizing whether it's something that needs therapeutic support or with community. And then once you know that it's community, it's about just doing that initial outreach. And there are community, I mean, I know in the UK, there are all sorts of entrepreneur groups and In North America, we've got great entrepreneur groups. There's almost one for every type of entrepreneur. So that's an easy place to start too.
And it seems that the most important thing here is the shared values, obviously, but it's also, just saying to these people whenever they're starting that, that we're creating a space here where we want to let our guards down, and we want it to be safe for us to share the actual struggles of what we're going through. And have you any thoughts on how best to create psychological safety? Like, how do you do that in Dovetail meetings, for example? Like, how do you facilitate that?
Yeah, definitely. It's a huge thing. And I don't think I was really aware that I was doing this when I started Dovetail, but I was doing it because it comes naturally from my teaching career and then in adult training and development and facilitation. Like you want to front load things. You want to make sure that people know what to expect, and you want to make sure that people know how to engage. What's the safe way to engage in this group? What are we here for, and what are we not here for? And what are the behaviors that are going to serve us all? And I always leave it open to contributions as well. But in Dovetail, we have three powers of community, and I say them at every meeting. And I know some of our ladies can recite them off by heart. It takes 2 seconds to, maybe not two, maybe 60 seconds to share them. But I think that just consistency of everyone knowing what the powers of community are, everyone knowing how to show up, why we show up, what the standard is, really sets that baseline for psych safety. I don't think that it's like, that's not all you need to do, but it's a really, really good foundation to build on. So, and I'm open to people taking these and running with them or modifying them for their own use. And I know they're probably used in other organizations as well, because I got them from working in the nonprofit world. So do you want to hear the powers of community? Would that help? Okay. Yeah. So ours are, the first one is the power of 2 feet and a heartbeat, which is just to be where your feet are. That if we show up, whether it's online or in person, and our thoughts are racing and we've got our phone out and we've got a million other projects and tasks that we're working on, and someone's trying to share honestly as we need to in these communities, we're not really listening. We're not all there. And so we just ask people to be where their feet are, to be fully present. If they've committed to being here, to actually be here. And if they can't be there, that's okay too. You have to make it acceptable that if you're not able to be all in, if you're not able to be fully there, then it's totally okay for you to excuse yourself, whether that's like temporarily or whether that's for the full experience, without any hard feelings. Because it happens. Like for me, a lot of my ladies are moms, and they've got kid stuff happening. And like we had a session the other day, and one of the women was just like, my kid's school called, and I can't, all I'm worrying about is what's happening there, and I've got to go. And this stuff happens. The second power of community is the power of knowledge and experience, which is just a really healthy reminder for everyone in the room that the knowledge that we need today, the experience that we need today, is here in this room. Because I think often, and I don't know if this applies to everyone, but I work with women, and a lot of the time there's this belief that like someone else holds all the knowledge, or someone else has the experience that I need, or someone's going to tell me what to do, especially among earlier stage entrepreneurs. Like, just, get this guru or this coach or someone, just tell me what to do. What am I supposed to do? And it's like a lot of that knowledge is in us, if we can tap into it and into our peers. And so we do a lot of knowledge sharing, and we do a lot of like wisdom circles and asking good questions and reflecting on things together. And so we always emphasize the power of knowledge and experience being right here. We also have incredible connections. And then the last is the power of confidentiality, which is Vegas rules. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in Dovetail stays in Dovetail, unless you're given explicit permission to share. Our ladies sign like a modified NDA. Legally enforcing that as a community facilitator would be a nightmare. So I like really hope that I never have to. But the idea is just that we do create a safe space and a place that requires a lot of trust. And especially because everyone is sharing, it's really imperative that we keep confidentiality. We don't record a lot of our sessions. We don't record our small group breakouts. We ask our ladies not to record them. We don't even take photos on a lot of our stuff, which is hard for marketing, but really great for the sense of safety within community. And I highly recommend that. I think people are so focused on like, how much video content can we get, that they forget that like when you've got a camera this close to your face, or when you think, oh, there's a camera over there, is the audio on? Can anybody hear me? It does take away from that sense of safety. And so for me, it's always been more about our community than about the marketing or any outside needs. So those are our powers of community.
That's great. So it's mainly to, be fully there. What's the rule? Be on your feet. What is it? Sorry.
The power of 2 feet and a heartbeat. So be where your feet are, be where your heart is, and just be as present as you can be. I've used these with other groups and they've asked about, well, does this mean I can't be on my phone? And I let the groups decide. Does that mean for your group that you don't want to have phones in the room? That's great. And if for your group it means you're going to keep phones in the room or whatever, like that's something that different groups can negotiate.
And then the other two is that all of the knowledge and experience is in the room already.
Yeah.
And
The
the
power
last
of
one,
knowledge and experience is the second one. And then the last one is the power of confidentiality.
got you, got you. Okay, great, great. Those are some great, I suppose, principles to keep in mind for anybody that's interested in doing this. Um, Something you said earlier that I want to go back on. You sort of said it and glossed over, but I think it's important. Whenever you were initially reaching out to these women, some of them were just like, leave me alone, sort of, like, and it's not easy to take those kind of rejections. So like, what was your self-talk like? Like, what was going through your mind that enabled you to keep going whenever people were giving you these kind of responses?
I just had to believe that it wasn't the right fit for them. I actually had a coach at the time, a coach for my other business, and I said, I want to do this. And she was like, no, you're just going to distract yourself. Like, stay on course. We're on course for growth here, which is really common coaching advice. And I respect it in many ways. But when I told her what I wanted to do, and she's, got lots of business experience and has been around for a long time, she's a little bit older as well. She's like, people like me will never pay to go to something like that. And I was crushed. I hung up the phone and I cried. And I thought, oh my gosh, if my own coach who knows me and likes me and trusts me and believes in me and, sees my heart and all these things, like if she doesn't believe that I can do this, like I don't know if I should do it. So I'm not immune to that. But I went away and I actually went for a hike that afternoon. I decided I need a little break from my desk, went for a hike, and I thought about it, but I also just like listened to myself and I was like, but this is where my heart is. This is what I really need. And like, if I don't try it, I'll regret not trying it. I'll regret not going all in. So I kept going. And so like when I had people, the laughs or the like, good luck, those comments came because at the first Dovetail Summit, we had investors, we had VCs in the room, and we also had founders who were seeking investment. And it was a little bit of a different model. That first one, it wasn't meant to be like investors, looking for investees or whatever. That wasn't the purpose, but there were kind of women at different stages of their business and in their experience. And people said, there's no way you're going to have a sense of community and safety if you've got investors and women seeking investment in the same room. And since then, we've really demonstrated that that is completely possible because VCs are humans too. And, they want to support others. They want to learn, they want to grow. They have the shared values in our community, and we've created a safe space where people can speak honestly. And we also really vet. So like, you're not coming to our summit or to our retreats just to seek investment. Like that's not the purpose of joining. And if you're really just coming because you want to stake out a VC, like it's not going to be a fit. So yeah, it was tough, but I think just like knowing what I really wanted and knowing that I had to at least try was what kept me going. And then after that first Dovetail Summit with the 50 women at the end of it, like they all stood up. I got this standing ovation, and it wasn't even about me. It was just like watching those women stand up, and I had them turn around and clap for themselves, for each other. And watching them do that was just this reinforcement that I needed to keep going, to want to continue to do it. And that same year, I hosted another one just a few months later on the West Coast, and that was the beginning of Dovetail.
I hope you fired that coach.
She actually came to Dovetail last year,
Oh,
paid to attend.
wow. Okay.
Full circle.
Okay.
Oh gosh,
Very
I hope
good.
she doesn't listen to this. She might. It's okay. I still love her.
Have you any other non-negotiables for building a community? Anything else apart from the psychological safety that people should really keep in mind if they're in the early stages of doing this?
Yeah. It's the hardest one, but you can't be for everyone. Every community is not for every human. What makes community safe and valuable for people is that there is a sense of shared values and that psychological safety is built in. And so that means being exclusive in some ways. And that's really hard. I've had people really push back on that. Like I've said that, and people have said, I don't agree at all. I think every community is meant to be fully inclusive of everyone, but you can't serve everyone. You can't meet everyone's needs. And I think especially when it comes to like intentional communities, whether it be for entrepreneurship or for moms or for whatever it is, if you don't have the same needs and the same shared values, then you really, as somebody who's facilitating community, like you really can't meet those needs. And it sort of becomes a bit aimless, or, the intention becomes diffused, or it can actually become harmful. So I think that's something really important that people have to keep in mind, is kind of becoming what do we say? We say exclusively inclusive. And so it's learning to exclude people who might have different intentions or different values in this scenario, and then to include people who share the same perspectives and values and goals and the same needs within our organization. But I would say that values alignment too is the biggest thing. Like when I started Dovetail, again, I didn't really even know that I was doing this. It's just naturally like from my background, but I had this list of values, just kind of an acronym running through my head all the time. The acronym was GLASS, which makes no sense to anyone else. But I was looking for women who were generous, who were lifelong learners, who believed that they could learn from anyone. That was really important, that you can't be the kind of learner that's like, well, if you're not, above me on the career ladder or whatever, then I have nothing to learn from you, or they're dismissive. That was important that they weren't. I wanted women that had a little bit of sense of adventure, that were purpose-filled in their business. So their business was more about than just filling their bank account. I don't believe that we should all live in poverty, but I also don't believe that business is just designed to fill our bank accounts. And I wanted women that had a sense of humility, but that were also very much fun and up for a good time as well. And I kept that acronym in my mind as I was calling people and having conversations. And if I got the sense that somebody was very much like in a season of their life where they could only take, or where they were like, oh, you've got investors coming and I just need to get in the room with this investor, that sense of generosity probably wasn't going to be there from her, because she was just in such a season of like need and scarcity and, more interested in receiving than in giving. And so that was an easy way to curate from the beginning. So I'd say that's probably another tip for people is be really intentional with who you're for and who you're not for, and then have a list of values that really make a strong fit for the group or the community that you're building.
That's great advice. And with regards to communities that, might break down or disintegrate, have you noticed any common patterns that might lead to that typically cause communities to fail?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I mentioned this to you the last time we chatted as well, but just this feeling of like, I would say there are a few. I'll start with like a lack of belonging, where people feel like this is, and again, it comes down to the values alignment, where they don't feel aligned with the folks in the community. They share very different values from the people in the community. Their intentions are different. And they just don't feel that connected. So I think when people don't feel belonging in a community, there is a stat I actually have from a study that was done, but 40% of departures from community, when people intentionally, like especially in a paid community, it's easier to study these things, but 40% of those departures come from people stating that they don't feel a sense of belonging within that community. And I feel like the easiest way to solve for that, again, it's values alignment, it's curation of the community, of being really clear who you're for and who you're not for. And then also just creating opportunities for people to feel seen and heard and loved for who they are. And it's not hard, but I think people sometimes make it hard. So that's the first one, just a weaker sense of belonging. And there are statistics around that. I think, again, that trying to serve everyone, misaligned goals, like it doesn't work. You can't build a community on the full spectrum of goals that none of them will be attained together. And if you don't have a clear mission or purpose behind what you're doing, community is not going to stick. And this is something that also we can talk about, is where people think they're building community, but they're building an audience. And then some of their audience disappears and they're like, well, I thought I had community. Like, what happened? And it was really that you had a one directional audience that was just following you or watching you. And you've been confused about the difference between a community and audience. And so you've been calling them your community. And really, it was a one directional presence. So that's another reason these things fall apart, when they're not actually communities. And then the last, I guess, I could talk about this all day, but I would say a bit of a toxic culture. So lack of guidelines. So not having those powers of communities or like ground rules or just expectations for what is and isn't permitted. And then also having a moderator to uphold them. I've had to remove people from Dovetail over the years. It's the hardest part of my job. And I know it's the hardest part for other community leaders as well. Like it's just terrible to say to someone, like, I don't think it's a fit anymore, and we won't be able to have you at our next event, or we'll have to take you out of the group, or we won't be able to keep you in your mastermind group. It's gut-wrenching and awful, but it's what keeps the community a safe space, and what keeps the community going is when you act quickly and decisively in accordance with your rules or policies or community guidelines.
Yeah, I've been part of like various sports teams throughout the years, and if there's one person in the group that is like potentially toxic, it spreads like wildfire and can destroy a team or any kind of group really fast. So I think what you're talking about is like it's really painful to do that in the short term, but long term, it's like, that's what a leader has to do sometimes, and that's really cool that you do that. Um, if you could get into a time machine now, Alexis, and you could go back to just before starting Dovetail and knowing everything that you now know, is there anything that you would do differently or anything that you would avoid doing, maybe to save yourself some time, save yourself hassle? Does anything come to mind when I ask that question?
Gosh. Not big on regret because I really believe things kind of happen in the order they're meant to happen. So you can learn things in the way you're meant to learn them. So you can, make the impact you're meant to make. And um, I guess if I wanted to like adhere to like this would be the perfect way to build the perfect community that may have, scaled faster or like have generated more revenue faster or whatever it is, I might have said like just be really, really hyper clear on who you're not for from the very beginning as far as business size. I think we had really strong values alignment, but we didn't always have, one core group just for like the very, very experienced, 8-figure plus entrepreneurs. And then we had groups, but there was a bit of mix and there wasn't, and so like that did make it a little bit more challenging over the years, but it sorted itself out. And we, over the time, created separate groups and things and found ways for all those groups to connect and found ways for women to kind of circle back and support women who are growing and scaling and all that kind of thing. So maybe I would have gone and done that differently. I think if I could talk to myself at the beginning and just say, like, if this is what you really, really love, like you are in for a wild ride. Like community work is not for the faint of heart. And I know there are loads of much, much more challenging careers out there and types of businesses to run. And I definitely know I'm privileged and I'm lucky in so many ways, but community is heart-wrenching. It's impossible for it not to become personal. This isn't, I own a corporate business, so I can speak to my own experience. I know what it's like, when things go awry in the corporate business. It's sad. And I'm like, oh, that's tough, or, I've had to let someone go or whatever it might be. But when things go awry with the community and the community that's so based on my personal values, and then I've built so many strong relationships and close friendships and, like friends coming to our wedding from my community and just, people that I've been by their side when their loved ones are dying. And it is a completely different experience. So I think if I could speak to myself, 7 years ago, I would just say like, you're in for a wild ride, but it is going to be worth every second of it. And just stay with it and know that it's a long game. That's not going to happen overnight. And there are going to be really, really hard and ugly times. And there are going to be times when you blame yourself for things happening. And I think just be prepared for that. And then also like there's a part of community that, like I said, it becomes really personal. So I think in a way as community leaders, like we have to depersonalize a little bit that like people are going to do things that you never could have expected that they would do. It's just going to happen. They're humans. And I think I blame myself, over the past few years, like I've witnessed these things and I'm like, oh, I should have predicted that. Or if I, could have intervened, or if I had not allowed this person into this group or this space or whatever. And it's like, people are gonna people. Like you can't make it about yourself and you can't personalize it or take it on. It's really, you do the best you can. It's not your responsibility to keep every human in line for their entire life experience. So yeah, depersonalization just a little bit.
For sure, for sure. People are going to people. I remember that. Yeah, no, I love what you said there about, like it's like we did a summit on attachment there earlier this month, and I interviewed a woman on grief for that, and she was just like saying, like, look, like love and grief are essentially two sides of the same coin. Like you can't have love in a relationship without the grief that is eventually going to lead to, because that's going to at some point disintegrate and go away. So whenever you're signing up for all the love and the good times, you're also signing up for the difficulty and the hard times whenever these things break down. So I think that's just something important to keep in mind. Um, Generally speaking, in as an entrepreneur, Alexis, have there been any habits that have been really beneficial in your life, or anything that you do now that you wish you maybe started doing at an earlier point?
I love this question because I always want to hear this answer from others too. It's one of the questions I ask my ladies all the time. Like, what are you doing now that you wish you'd started a year ago? Um, gosh, right now, again, like I was saying with my meditation, I feel like we've been in a little bit of a wild ride the last few months. So I haven't been as rigorous with some of the habits that really served me. But I did go through a long phase of being pretty diehard about cold plunge, which I had to stop my regular practice because it does impact fertility, apparently, according to my naturopath. But I was like really, we live on a lake. We also used to live on a lake before we moved. And I had an ice hole and I was in there every day of the winter. I did 100 days in a row a couple of years ago. And it's like, it's just for presencing. Like I would meditate and then I would go and do a little bit of breath work and then go in the ice hole in the morning. And I know it's such a cliche now with all these entrepreneurs doing it. But for me, it just made me like really present and like, again, shut out the outside world, focus on your breathing. And, the endorphin rush you get from it is unlike anything else. So you start your day just feeling incredible. If it works for you. Ice plunging doesn't work for everyone. So I think that was a really, really good thing. And I think too, just like when I'm always meeting women entrepreneurs. I get introduced to them all the time. Or even this morning, I was at my Pilates studio in Toronto, and I saw this woman had a sweatshirt on that I recognized the brand. I was like, "Oh, are you wearing? Is that from this brand?" And we started chatting, and she's of course a woman entrepreneur. And when I meet people like that, I'm not like, oh, focused on like, is this a client? Is this, a sale? Is this somebody that would join the community? It's just approaching all of these people with just great curiosity and a desire to serve and to connect, and knowing that Dovetail's a long game, and maybe she'll be part of Dovetail one day and maybe she won't, and maybe she'll just be a great connection, or maybe I was meant to meet her so that I could connect her with one of the women in our community, or maybe her services with the services of another entrepreneur. And so I think pretty early on I figured this out, but just looking at these relationships as real relationships, and that the joining of the community or becoming a client or whatever is just a bonus. So I think like a lot of entrepreneurs just get stuck into this, like everything is a sale, and you can feel it. Like you just, even my face, where I'm like, you just feel it's a bit gross, and I'll like make introductions. Sometimes people be like, oh, I chatted with her and I just felt like she didn't want to connect with me. All she wanted was for me to like buy her services or whatever it was. I just didn't feel like she really cared. So I think the message for me is just like, just continue to approach it like that. Like you really give a damn that you're in this for the long game, that you just really care about your mission, whether that includes, a financial transaction or an official joining of anything, that you're here to serve, and it's the most important thing.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything quite as icky as like someone that looks at relationships in a transactional way, and they're sort of like looking, how can this person benefit my gain, or how can this person, make me money or whatever. Like they're looking at the person as a means to an end, as opposed to just prioritizing the relationship between people. That is quite horrible. But it's very common. Um,
And I like try not to fault people, because I do think it can be like a season for people. Like even like I said about curation of our community, like I think sometimes people go through these seasons in their lives and their businesses where maybe there's something that's happened and they're in scarcity and they're kind of freaking out. And so everything becomes a transaction, or they're gripping and they need to make this sale or whatever it is. And sometimes you need to go through it and see what's happening to understand that that's not the best way to approach it.
you mentioned earlier that you went to quite a few events before starting Dovetail. Were there any of those that were particularly outstanding for you? Any of those that are worth commenting on?
No. And that's not like, I hope that doesn't sound like I'm being wildly egotistical. Well, there was one, well, no, that was after I started Dovetail. I went to one that was like an entrepreneur, like summer camp for entrepreneurs, mostly in the tech world. So I thought, hey, it's good for connecting with people, and maybe we'll make some business things if I don't connect with people, if I don't, really. And we're really, yeah, there were just things that were happening with women there that were totally inappropriate and unacceptable, and they were really sexist. And then one of the people that they kept holding up as an example for all these guys, because he's super successful in the tech world, turned out that he was abusing women at this event. So, I mean, I just had some really bad experiences. Like there were, yeah, there were not many things that I went to that I was like, this is the thing to hold up to the light as an example of what's possible. I will say though, now that I've been in this space, I've made friends with other people who host community. And like, I was lucky enough to be part of a small group of people that do what I do. And so got to know Jason Gaynard, who runs MMT, and Hollis Carter, who runs Baby Bathwater. And then I was part of Baby Bathwater for a couple of years and just love them, good humans. and Mike Bursick, who runs Wayfinders, and just other people doing this work. And so I know there are other really beautiful communities out there and beautiful events. But when I started Dovetail, I wasn't finding it. And I'm kind of glad I didn't, because it really pushed me to start Dovetail.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've had some interactions with Mike. Thanks for the intro there, by the way, and Jason as well, and both just super generous, good human beings, you know. When you hear the word successful, Alexis, who would be some of the people that would come to mind for you?
Um, a couple different ones. They're not like big famous names, so I don't know if it helps to like name names, but I will. The most successful people, like my husband and I actually talk about this. We talk about who are the couples in our lives or that we've met or that we know that we're like, oh, we would, love to emulate parts of their relationship or their dynamic or the way they've chosen to live. And then the same thing with like women that I meet that are in business. I mean, what is it about their life or their work or how they show up in the world that I think is really successful? And one is actually one of my board members, and just a mentor of mine and a beautiful human being. And she has a holding company and a construction business in Montana, but she's a little bit older and she's a grandma now. And her success, like, yeah, she's had great financial success, but she's got a beautiful circle of friends. She's part of boards and philanthropic opportunities that she's really excited about. She contributes, she gets to continue to learn. Wherever she goes, she's all in. So when she's at Dovetail, when she comes to Summit, she's, 2 feet in a heartbeat. She's right in the room and sharing and learning and growing and eager to learn from others. And she's just a really present person. Like when she's with you, you feel it and you feel like she really cares. And everyone says that a conversation with Brenda is unlike anything else. Like there's caring and then there's like Brenda caring. And so I would call that success. She's got a really beautiful family life and she's had loads of hardship and family and business, but she's really met all of that with a lot of grace and a lot of I don't think the word I'm looking for, but just very even keel and acceptance. And just wanting to serve and support and love people and be present with them. So she's one that always comes to mind because she's just an absolute joy. Um, and then there's just another friend of mine has a small business. It's actually a community as well. And she's a nurse anesthetist, and she was realizing the struggles of nurses and nurse practitioners in the US especially, but also in Canada. And, they have a lot of challenges. Like nursing is like quite a challenging career. And she wanted to connect with other nurses who were in the same position as her. And so she started a nurse community, started running retreats. And she does like 4 or 5 retreats a year now, in addition to her nurse anesthesiology. And she's just really aligned with her values, knows what she wants, knows how she wants to scale. She's done well with the business and certainly with her career, but she also she makes time to do the things she loves with the people she loves. And she's big into sailing and makes an effort to get out and sail and still travels. And nothing feels hectic or harried or unnatural in her world and her business. Like, sure, she has stress, but it's never approached from a sense of like taking it out on anyone else. So those are 2 people, Sarah and Brenda.
Shout out to Sarah and Brenda. They sound like incredible people. All right, so last question just to wrap up. For anybody listening to this that like maybe they're a female entrepreneur and they're really interested in what you're doing with Dovetail and they want to learn more, like how can they find out about the community and how to apply and get involved and things?
Yeah, so we don't have a huge social presence right now on social media, but we do have a website. You can learn a little bit more on there. It'll be evolving over the next couple of weeks as we get into 2025 and our programming. We currently have a couple of things that'll be on the website. One is you can just apply for community membership, which will give you access to a few things that we do year round with the community online and in person. And then the other is that we have a mentorship mastermind right now. So if you have a company that is poised to scale, that you have typically the women in that are around 5 to 55 employees, but that have a solid team and are ready to scale that business up. We have a program that starts in mid-January. So that's also on our website. And our website is at dovetail.community. So it's a .community, not a .com. And Dovetail is just like the dovetail joint, the corner of a log cabin. So DOVETAIL, and then .community with 2 M's.
Amazing. Well, Alexis, I've enjoyed every minute of this conversation. Thanks so much for your time today. And I want to wish you the best going forward with everything you're doing.